The summer sun beat down on the dusty Colorado road with such merciless intensity that the very air seemed to shimmer and dance. And it was on this particular afternoon in August of 1878 that Harrison Bennett saw the young woman collapse in a heap of dark blue calico and tangled auburn hair, her carpetbag tumbling from her grip and spilling its contents across the parched earth. Harrison had been riding back to his ranch after delivering a string of horses to a buyer in Buena Vista when he spotted her struggling along the roadside, her gait unsteady and her steps growing more labored with each passing moment. He had urged his gelding into a faster trot, but before he could reach her, she swayed once, twice, and then dropped like a stone. He was off his horse in an instant, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to where she lay motionless in the dirt. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features now pale beneath a sheen of sweat. Her lips were cracked and dry, and when he pressed his fingers to her wrist, her pulse fluttered weak and rapid beneath his touch. Harrison glanced around at the empty landscape, the rocky peaks of the Sawatch Range rising in the distance, but there was no shelter here, no shade except what his own body could provide. He positioned himself to block the sun from her face, then reached for his canteen. "Miss," he said, lifting her head gently and trying to coax a few drops of water between her lips. "Miss, can you hear me?" She did not respond at first, and he felt a surge of worry tighten in his chest. He dampened his bandana and pressed it to her forehead, her temples, the back of her neck. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only a minute or two, her eyelids fluttered. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. "Easy now," Harrison said softly. "Do not try to talk, just drink a little water." This time, when he brought the canteen to her lips, she managed a few small sips. Color began to return to her cheeks, though she still looked dangerously exhausted. Her eyes opened fully, revealing irises the color of sage, and she stared up at him with confusion and embarrassment warring across her features. "I am sorry," she managed to whisper. "I did not mean to be such trouble." "You are no trouble at all," Harrison assured her. "But what in heaven's name are you doing out here alone in this heat? There is not another soul for miles." She tried to sit up, but he kept a steadying hand on her shoulder. "The stagecoach," she said weakly. "It broke a wheel about 5 miles back." The driver said he would send help from the next town, but he needed the horses to go fetch a replacement wheel and another coach. "He told us passengers to wait, but I thought I could walk to wherever was closest. I had heard there was a town not far from where we stopped." "St. Elmo is still another 8 miles from here," Harrison said, shaking his head. "And in this heat, walking would be suicide. Where are the other passengers?" There was only one other, an older gentleman. He decided to wait with the luggage. Her eyes clouded with worry. "I should not have left him. I just thought I could manage the walk, but the heat was worse than I expected, and I ran out of water about an hour ago." Harrison looked at the relentless sun, then back at the young woman whose name he still did not know. "We need to get you out of this sun properly. My ranch is about 3 miles north of here. It is much closer than St. Elmo, and you can rest there while we send someone to help the other passenger and retrieve your belongings from the broken-down stage." She hesitated, clearly uncertain about accepting help from a stranger, but another wave of dizziness seemed to wash over her, and she nodded weakly. "Thank you. I am Rose Kimball from Boston." "Harrison Bennett," he replied, then carefully helped her to her feet. She swayed against him, and he kept his arm around her waist to steady her. "Can you ride?" "I have ridden before," Rose said, though her voice lacked confidence, "though it has been some time." Harrison led her to his horse, a patient bay gelding named Rusty, who stood perfectly still as Harrison lifted Rose into the saddle. He gathered her scattered belongings and stuffed them back into her carpet bag, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She tensed at first, but then relaxed against him, too weak to maintain her propriety. "Just lean back," Harrison said quietly. "I will not let you fall." The ride to the Bennett ranch took nearly an hour at the slow pace Harrison maintained for Rose's sake. She drifted in and out of consciousness, and he kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation, telling her about the ranch, the cattle he raised, the horses he bred and trained. He was not sure if she heard him, but it seemed important to keep talking, to anchor her to wakefulness. When the ranch finally came into view, Harrison felt a rush of relief. It was not a grand spread by any means, just a modest house of weathered timber, a sturdy barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. But it was home, the place he had built with his own 2 hands over the past 5 years after leaving his family's farm in Missouri. A young Mexican man emerged from the barn as they approached. "Jeef," he called out, then stopped short when he saw Rose slumped against Harrison. "What happened?" "Miguel, this is Miss Kimball. She fainted from the heat on the road. I need you to ride to where the stage broke down, about 8 miles south on the main road, then another 5 miles beyond that. There is an older man waiting there, and we need to bring him and Miss Kimball's luggage back here. Then someone needs to ride to St. Elmo and let them know what happened." Miguel nodded, already heading back to the barn to saddle a fresh horse. Harrison dismounted, then carefully lifted Rose down from the saddle. She was barely conscious now, her head lolling against his shoulder as he carried her toward the house. Inside, the house was blessedly cool, the thick timber walls and small windows keeping out the worst of the heat. Harrison had only 4 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, his bedroom, a small spare room that he used for storage, and a lean-to washroom attached to the back. He carried Rose to his bedroom and laid her gently on the bed, then hurried to pump fresh water and gather clean cloths. For the next several hours, Harrison tended to Rose with the same care he would give to a sick animal, though with considerably more concern. He bathed her face and arms with cool water, coaxed her to drink regularly, and monitored her breathing and pulse. As the afternoon waned and the temperature began to drop, Rose's condition improved. Her color returned, her breathing steadied, and eventually she fell into what appeared to be a natural sleep rather than the concerning semi-consciousness of before. Harrison sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her sleep and wondering about this Rose Kimball from Boston. She wore no wedding ring, and there had been no mention of a husband or family waiting for her. What brought a proper Eastern lady to the wilds of Colorado? The question nagged at him, but he knew it would have to wait until she was strong enough to talk. Night had fallen when Rose finally stirred awake. She blinked in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings, lit only by a single oil lamp on the bedside table. When her gaze landed on Harrison, who had dozed off in his chair, understanding seemed to flood back. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly. He jerked awake, instantly alert. "Miss Kimball, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." She pushed herself up to sitting, looking embarrassed. "I seem to have taken over your bed. This is your room, is it not?" "Do not worry about that. You needed the rest." Harrison stood and poured her a cup of water from the pitcher on the dresser. "My hand Miguel returned a few hours ago with the other passenger, a Mr. Thornton. He is settled in the spare room. We also retrieved your trunk and bags." "Thank you," Rose said, accepting the water and drinking deeply. "You have been very kind. I'm not sure what would have happened if you had not come along when you did. Best not to think about that." Harrison moved to light another lamp, chasing away some of the shadows. "Are you hungry? I can fix you something to eat. I do not want to impose any further." "It is no imposition. Besides, you need to eat to get your strength back. Rose seemed to realize that arguing would be pointless, so she nodded. Then yes, I am quite hungry, actually. Harrison helped her to her feet, and though she was steadier than before, he kept a supporting hand at her elbow as they made their way to the main room. He settled her in a chair at the simple wooden table, then set about preparing a meal. His cooking skills were basic, honed by years of bachelorhood, but he managed to put together a decent supper of fried ham, eggs, biscuits, and canned beans. As they ate, Rose told him her story. She had been traveling to Colorado to take a position as a schoolteacher in St. Elmo, a position arranged through a placement agency in Boston. She was an orphan, she explained matter-of-factly, raised by an elderly aunt who had passed away the previous winter. With no other family and limited prospects in Boston, she had decided to seek adventure and opportunity in the West. I suppose I romanticized it somewhat, she admitted with a rueful smile. The agency made it sound very civilized, but the reality of the journey has been rather more challenging than I anticipated. Harrison found himself drawn to her resilience, the way she could smile even after the ordeal she had been through. St. Elmo is a good town, he said. Small, but the people are decent. I am sure you will do well there. Have you lived here long? 5 years. I came out from Missouri after my father died and left the family farm to my older brother. I wanted to build something of my own, so I headed west and ended up here. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily despite their being strangers. Harrison learned that Rose loved books, that she played piano though not particularly well, that she had a gift for teaching and genuinely looked forward to having her own schoolroom. Rose learned that Harrison had fought briefly in the cavalry before his discharge in 1873, that he was 26 years old, that he preferred horses to cattle, but raised both because the cattle paid better. When Rose finally retired to the bedroom again, Harrison made himself comfortable on a bedroll in the main room. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, he found his thoughts returning again and again to the young woman sleeping in his bed. There was something about her, a quiet strength beneath her proper Eastern manners, that intrigued him in a way he had not experienced before. The next morning, Rose emerged from the bedroom looking much recovered, though Harrison insisted she take another day of rest before continuing to St. Elmo. Mr. Thornton, a portly gentleman in his 60s who was traveling to visit his daughter in Leadville, was equally grateful for the hospitality and in no hurry to resume his journey. Rose proved to be delightful company. She helped Harrison prepare meals, laughing at her own inexperience with the cast iron stove and the limited ingredients available. She sat on the porch in the evening, watching Harrison and Miguel work with a young horse in the corral, asking intelligent questions about training techniques. She mended a tear in one of Harrison's shirts that she spotted hanging on a line, waving off his protests that she was a guest and should not be working. When Mr. Thornton left on the third day, catching a ride with a freight wagon heading north, Rose remained. She claimed she wanted to be absolutely certain she was fully recovered, but Harrison suspected there was more to it than that. He certainly was not eager to see her go. The ranch felt different with her there, warmer somehow despite the lingering summer heat. The evenings were no longer lonely, but filled with conversation and laughter. On the 5th day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Rose turned to Harrison with a serious expression. "I should leave for St. Elmo tomorrow," she said quietly. "I have imposed on your hospitality far too long, and the school term will be starting soon. I need to meet with the town council and get settled." Harrison felt something twist in his chest. "You have not been an imposition," he said, and meant it with his whole heart. "These past days have been some of the best I have spent since coming to Colorado." Rose met his gaze, and in her sage green eyes he saw his own feelings reflected back at him. "For me as well," she admitted. "But I have obligations, Mr. Bennett. I accepted the teaching position, and I need to honor that commitment." "I understand. And please call me Harrison." "Only if you call me Rose." That night, Harrison lay awake on his bedroll, wrestling with emotions he had not expected to feel. He had known Rose for less than a week, but already the thought of her absence felt like a physical ache. He had spent 5 years building his ranch, content with his solitary life, but now that contentment felt hollow. How had this woman from Boston, with her proper manners and her books and her determination to make a new life in the West, managed to turn his world upside down in just a few days? The answer came to him as dawn broke over the mountains. It was because Rose was exactly the kind of woman he had not known he was looking for. Strong but gentle, educated but practical, brave enough to travel halfway across the country alone, but wise enough to accept help when she needed it. She was everything he wanted and nothing he had planned for. Harrison rose with the sun and went about his morning chores with unusual haste. By the time Rose emerged from the bedroom, already dressed and ready for travel, he had made his decision. He just was not sure how to execute it. "I will drive you to St. Elmo in the wagon," Harrison announced over breakfast. "It is too far to ride and you will need your trunk." "You do not have to do that," Rose protested, though her eyes were grateful. "I am sure I can arrange transport." "I am taking you," Harrison said firmly. "It is settled." The wagon ride to St. Elmo took most of the morning, the road winding through valleys and around rocky outcroppings. They talked as they had every day, but there was an undercurrent of sadness now, an awareness that their time together was ending. Harrison pointed out landmarks, showed her where the best fishing spots were, told her which families in the area had children who would likely be her students. St. Elmo emerged from the landscape like something from a storybook, a small mining town nestled in a valley with the mountains rising dramatically on all sides. The main street was lined with wood frame buildings, some painted, most weathered gray by wind and sun. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, a handful of other businesses, and at the far end of town, a small white building with a bell tower that could only be the schoolhouse. Harrison helped Rose down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the door of the boarding house where the agency had arranged for her to stay. Mrs. Patterson, the proprietress, was a bustling woman in her 50s who took one look at Rose and immediately began fussing over her like a mother hen. "You poor dear," Mrs. Patterson clucked. "We heard about the stage trouble, how dreadful for you. Well, you are here now, safe and sound. Come in, come in. I have a lovely room ready for you." Harrison stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand, as Mrs. Patterson swept Rose inside. Rose glanced back at him, her expression torn. "Thank you, Harrison," she said softly, "for everything. You are welcome, Rose." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that he could not imagine going back to the empty ranch, that these past days had changed something fundamental in him, that he thought he might be falling in love with her. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by uncertainty and the watchful presence of Mrs. Patterson. Instead, he simply nodded, settled his hat back on his head, and walked away. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of Harrison's life. Every mile felt wrong, like he was making a terrible mistake, but could not figure out how to fix it. By the time he reached home, dusk was falling and his mood was as dark as the gathering night. Miguel took one look at his face and wisely said nothing, just took the wagon horses to be unhitched and tended. Harrison stalked into the empty house, and the silence hit him like a physical blow. Rose's presence lingered everywhere. In the clean dishes stacked neatly in the cupboard, in the curtains she had rehung more evenly, in the book she had been reading that still sat on the table. Harrison picked up the book, a volume of Tennyson's poetry, and a folded piece of paper fell out. He unfolded it to find a note in Rose's neat handwriting. "Dear Harrison, thank you for saving my life and for giving me the kindest welcome to Colorado I could have imagined. I will never forget these days we spent together. If you ever find yourself in St. Elmo, I hope you will visit. Yours truly, Rose Kimball." Harrison read the note 3 times, then carefully refolded it and slipped it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. He stood there in the dim room, wrestling with himself. Then, almost without conscious decision, he turned and walked out to the barn where Miguel was forking hay into the stalls. "Miguel, can you manage things here for a few days?" Miguel looked up, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Of course, Jeef. Why, where are you going?" "I am not entirely sure yet," Harrison admitted, "but I need to figure something out and I cannot do it here." Miguel's face split into a knowing grin. "It is the lady, yes, the pretty teacher." "Yes," Harrison said simply. There was no point in denying it. "Go," Miguel said, making a shooing motion. "The ranch will be fine. Go get your lady." But Harrison did not go that night. Instead, he spent the next 3 days in a kind of agony, trying to work, trying to plan, trying to figure out what exactly he could offer Rose Kimball. He was just a rancher, a man with calloused hands and basic manners, living a hard life in a harsh land. She was educated, refined, had come west to build a career as a teacher. What right did he have to disrupt her plans? Yet he could not stop thinking about her. The way she laughed at his jokes, even the ones that were not particularly funny. The way she had looked at sunset that evening on the porch, her face soft and unguarded. The way she fit into his life as if she had always been meant to be there. On the 4th day, Harrison received an unexpected visitor. The Reverend Hoskins from the church in St. Elmo rode up to the ranch on a sturdy gray mare, his clerical collar visible beneath his dust coat. "Mr. Bennett," the Reverend greeted him warmly. "I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to come thank you personally for your assistance to Miss Kimball. The whole town has been quite concerned about the stage incident." "It was nothing," Harrison said, though he was confused about why the Reverend would ride all this way for a simple thank you. "It was far from nothing," Reverend Hoskins corrected gently. "Miss Kimball might have died if you had not found her when you did. She speaks very highly of you." Harrison's heart jumped. "She does?" "Oh, yes." "In fact," the Reverend's eyes twinkled, "she seems quite preoccupied with thoughts of you, if I am any judge of such things. I have known many young ladies in my years of ministry, Mr. Bennett, and I recognize the signs of a woman whose heart has been touched." Hope flared in Harrison's chest, bright and painful. "Did she say something?" "Not in so many words. But when I visited her yesterday to discuss her plans for the school, she mentioned you no fewer than a dozen times." "Harrison says this, Harrison showed me that, Harrison told me about the other thing. It was really quite obvious." "I see," Harrison said slowly, his mind racing. Reverend Hoskins leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Bennett, I am a man of God, but I am also a practical man. Miss Kimball is a fine woman who has come a long way to build a new life. You are a good man with an honest living and a solid reputation. If there is something growing between you, do not let it wither from lack of attention. Life is too short and good women too rare." With that, the Reverend tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Harrison standing in the yard with his thoughts in turmoil. But this time, the turmoil was different. This time, he knew what he needed to do. Harrison went into the house, shaved carefully, put on his best shirt and cleanest trousers, and polished his boots until they shone. He saddled Rusty and rode to St. Elmo at a pace just short of reckless, arriving in town as the afternoon sun slanted through the streets. He found Rose at the schoolhouse, arranging desks and unpacking boxes of books and supplies. She looked up when his shadow fell across the doorway, and her face lit up in a way that made his heart hammer against his ribs. "Harrison," she breathed, setting down the book she had been holding. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside, suddenly nervous despite all his planning on the ride over. "I needed to talk to you about something important." Rose wiped her dusty hands on her apron, her expression cautious but hopeful. "All right." Harrison took a deep breath. "These past few days without you at the ranch have been miserable," he said bluntly. "The house feels empty, the work feels meaningless, and I cannot stop thinking about you. I know we have only known each other for a short time, and I know you came here with plans of your own, but I cannot let you go without telling you how I feel." Rose was staring at him, her eyes wide and bright. She did not speak, so Harrison forged ahead. "I am not a poet, and I do not have fancy words, but I know that when I found you on that road, something changed in me. Every moment we spent together felt right in a way nothing in my life has felt before. You are smart and brave and kind, and you make me want to be a better man." He paused, gathering his courage. "I am in love with you, Rose Kimball. I think I have been since that first day, though I did not know it right away." Tears were sliding down Rose's cheeks now, but she was smiling. "Harrison, wait," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Let me finish. I know you have this teaching position, and I would never ask you to give up something important to you. But St. Elmo is not that far from my ranch. Maybe 8 miles. I could ride here every day to see you, or you could come visit on weekends when you are not teaching. We could court properly, take our time, figure out if this is real or just something brought on by the circumstances of how we met." Rose closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and took his hands in hers. "It is real," she said firmly. "At least it is for me. I have been miserable too, Harrison. I thought I was excited about teaching, and I am, but all I could think about was you. Working in your kitchen, sitting on your porch, listening to your stories. I missed you so much it hurt." "Then we will make this work," Harrison said, relief flooding through him. "Somehow we will make it work." Rose reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I have a better idea," she said softly. "Why do I not just marry you?" Harrison was certain he had misheard. "What?" "Marry me, Harrison Bennett. I came west looking for a new life, and I have found something better than I ever dreamed of. I found you." She laughed, a sound filled with joy and tears. "Unless you think it is too soon or too improper," or he kissed her then, cutting off her nervous babble, pouring all his feelings into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Harrison was grinning like a fool. "Yes," he said. "Yes to marrying you, yes to everything." Rose laughed again and kissed him once more. "I suppose I should be scandalized at myself, proposing to a man I have known for less than 2 weeks, but I am not. This feels right, Harrison. It feels like coming home." "I know exactly what you mean." They stood there in the dusty schoolhouse, holding each other close, and Harrison sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the heat, the broken stage, and the dusty road that had brought Rose into his life. The practical details had to be worked out, of course. Rose met with the town council and explained that, while she could not take the permanent teaching position as originally planned, she would be happy to teach until they could find a replacement. The council, perhaps swayed by the romantic nature of the situation, agreed readily. Reverend Hoskins was delighted to perform the wedding ceremony, and immediately began planning it for 3 weeks hence, declaring that a proper wedding required at least that much preparation. Those 3 weeks flew by in a blur of activity. Rose continued teaching, getting to know her students and the families of St. Elmo. Harrison rode to town every evening after finishing his work at the ranch, courting Rose properly under the watchful but approving eye of Mrs. Patterson. They took long walks, attended church socials together, and spent hours talking about their future. Harrison formally proposed with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. Rose cried when he slipped it on her finger, telling him it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the first hints of autumn. The church was packed with townspeople and the ranching families from the surrounding area, all curious to see the Eastern teacher marry the quiet rancher who had saved her life. Rose wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Patterson had helped her alter from a gown that had belonged to the proprietress's own daughter. Harrison wore his Sunday best, his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a high shine. As Rose walked down the aisle, Harrison thought his heart might burst from his chest. She was beautiful, radiant, and incredibly, impossibly about to become his wife. When she reached his side and placed her hand in his, he felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. Reverend Hoskins beamed at them both. "Dearly beloved," he began, and the ceremony unfolded with traditional vows and blessings. When it came time for Harrison to say, "I do," his voice was steady and sure. When Rose repeated the words, tears of joy sparkled on her lashes. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Hoskins declared. "Mr. Bennett, you may kiss your bride." Harrison did, to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered. When they broke apart, Rose was now Rose Bennett, and Harrison had never been happier in his entire life. The wedding celebration continued at the town hall with food and music and dancing. Harrison, who had never been much of a dancer, found himself spinning Rose around the floor, laughing at his own clumsy steps and not caring one bit. Miguel attended, grinning and clapping Harrison on the back, telling Rose that she had tamed the wild bachelor of the mountains. As the sun began to set, Harrison and Rose slipped away from the celebration. They climbed into the wagon Harrison had decorated with ribbons and wildflowers, and began the journey to the ranch that was now their shared home. Rose snuggled against Harrison's side, her head on his shoulder, and sighed contentedly. "Mrs. Rose Bennett," she said, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Harrison agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "So do I." The ranch looked different when they arrived, and it took Harrison a moment to realize why. Miguel had strung lanterns around the porch and left wildflowers in jars on the steps. The house glowed warmly in the dusk, welcoming them home. Harrison carried Rose over the threshold as tradition demanded, and she laughed in delight. He set her down gently in the main room, and for a moment they simply stood there, married and alone together for the first time. "Welcome home, Mrs. Bennett," Harrison said softly. Rose smiled up at him, her eyes full of love. "There is nowhere else I would rather be." That night marked the true beginning of their life together, and as the days turned into weeks and then months, Harrison and Rose built something beautiful out of the chance encounter on a dusty road. Rose proved to be a natural partner in the ranching life, learning quickly and working hard despite her Eastern upbringing. She took over the management of the household, turning the bachelor dwelling into a real home with curtains and rugs and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Harrison found that having Rose in his life made every aspect of it better. Work was more rewarding when he could share his successes with her at day's end. Challenges were more manageable when he could discuss them with someone who cared. Even simple moments, like sitting on the porch watching the sunset, were transformed into something special when she was beside him. They faced their share of difficulties, of course. The first winter was harsh, with snowdrifts piling against the house and temperatures dropping so low that the water in the pump froze solid. Rose, unaccustomed to such extremes, struggled initially but refused to complain. She learned to dress in layers, to keep the stove burning hot, to help Harrison break ice in the water troughs for the livestock. In the spring, they faced a different challenge when a neighboring rancher tried to claim that Harrison's fence had encroached on his land. The dispute grew heated, with threats of legal action and worse. Rose, drawing on her education and natural intelligence, helped Harrison research the property boundaries and prepare documentation proving his claim. When they presented their case to the local magistrate, their thorough preparation won the day, and the neighbor was forced to back down. Through all of it, their love deepened. Harrison discovered new facets of Rose's character: her fierce loyalty, her quick wit, her unexpected stubbornness when she believed she was right. Rose learned that beneath Harrison's quiet exterior lay a passionate nature, a man who loved deeply and completely once he committed his heart. As summer returned, bringing with it the anniversary of the day they met, Rose had news that filled them both with joy and trepidation. She was with child. Harrison reacted with a mixture of elation and terror, immediately becoming overprotective and hovering anxiously. Rose bore his fussing with patient amusement, assuring him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time and she would be fine. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Harrison's worries. Rose remained active, continuing to help with lighter ranch work and maintaining the household. As her belly grew round and the baby's movements became visible, Harrison would spend evenings with his hand pressed against her, marveling at the life they had created together. In February of 1880, on a snowy night that saw Harrison pacing frantically while the midwife attended Rose, their first child was born. It was a boy, healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Henry, after Harrison's father. Fatherhood transformed Harrison in ways he had not anticipated. The fierce love he felt for his tiny son was overwhelming, matched only by his love for Rose, who seemed to glow with contentment as she nursed and cared for their baby. The ranch house, once so silent and empty, now rang with the sounds of family: baby cries, lullabies, laughter. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, the Bennett ranch prospered. Harrison's reputation as a horse trainer spread, bringing buyers from as far as Denver. Rose managed their finances with a careful eye, ensuring they saved enough to weather lean times and invest in improvements. They added onto the house, building a proper bedroom for Henry and a larger kitchen for Rose. Miguel, who had been with Harrison since the early days of the ranch, became like family. He was Uncle Miguel to Henry, teaching the boy Spanish words and showing him how to care for the animals. Harrison trusted him completely, valuing his friendship as much as his skills as a ranch hand. When Henry was 2 years old, Rose became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was more difficult, with Rose suffering from severe sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. Harrison hired a woman from town to help with the housework and care for Henry, refusing to let Rose overtax herself. She protested but secretly was grateful for the help. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, a delicate girl with auburn hair like her mother and Harrison's strong features. They named her Helen, and she wrapped both her parents around her tiny fingers from the moment she drew her first breath. Henry, now old enough to understand he had a baby sister, was fascinated and endlessly gentle with her. The years that followed were filled with the chaos and joy of raising young children while managing a growing ranch. There were sleepless nights when babies were sick, frantic days when livestock got loose, moments of pure terror when Henry fell from a fence and broke his arm. But there were also countless moments of happiness. First steps and first words, Christmas mornings, summer picnics by the creek that ran through their property, family dinners around the table Harrison had built with his own hands. Rose proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and loving but firm when necessary. She taught both children to read before they were old enough for school, filling their minds with stories and knowledge. Harrison taught them practical skills: how to ride, how to care for animals, how to fix things that broke. Together, they raised their children with a foundation of love, hard work, and integrity. As Henry and Helen grew older, they became more involved in ranch life. Henry showed a natural aptitude for working with horses, just like his father. By the time he was 8, he could sit a horse as well as most adults and had a gentle touch that the animals responded to. Helen preferred the cattle, surprisingly, and had a head for numbers that suggested she had inherited her mother's sharp mind. The Bennett Ranch became known throughout the region not just for quality horses, but as an example of what could be achieved through hard work and partnership. Other ranchers' wives would seek Rose's advice on everything from managing household budgets to dealing with difficult suppliers. Young cowboys looking for work hoped to be hired by Harrison, knowing he was fair and paid well. In 1887, when Henry was 7 and Helen 5, Rose surprised Harrison with the news of another pregnancy. They had assumed their family was complete, but the surprise was a welcome one. This pregnancy was easier than Helen's had been, and in early 1888 they welcomed another son, whom they named Harold. Harold was a cheerful baby who grew into an energetic toddler, keeping everyone on their toes. Henry and Helen adored their baby brother, competing to help care for him. The house was noisier than ever, filled with the sounds of 3 children playing, arguing, laughing, growing through all the years and all the changes. Harrison's love for Rose never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and the life they had built together. He never forgot that first day on the dusty road, when he had seen her fall, and had rushed to help without knowing that he was rushing toward his entire future. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Rose on a trip to Denver, leaving the children with Miguel and his wife, who had married a few years prior, and moved into a small house on the ranch property. It was the first time they had been truly alone since Henry's birth, and they reveled in the freedom, walking arm in arm through the city streets, dining in fancy restaurants, staying in a hotel with indoor plumbing and gas lighting. On their last night in the city, as they sat in their hotel room overlooking the bustling streets below, Harrison took Rose's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up teaching the life you planned, all of it?" Rose looked at him with astonishment. "Regret it? Harrison, marrying you and building this life with you is the best thing I ever did. I found so much more than I was looking for when I came west." She squeezed his hand. "That day on the road, when I fainted from the heat and woke up to see you there, I thought you were saving my life. I did not know then that you were giving me a life worth living." Harrison pulled her close, overcome with emotion. "You gave me the same thing," he said roughly. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made everything mean something." They held each other as the night deepened over Denver, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, even when they had not known they were searching. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all years do. Harrison's mother passed away in Missouri, and though he had not seen her in years, the loss hit him hard. Rose comforted him through his grief, and they made the long journey back to Missouri so he could attend the funeral and make peace with his family. His brother, seeing the life Harrison had built and the love he shared with Rose, admitted that perhaps the younger Bennett had made the wiser choice after all. Rose's connection to her past in Boston was more tenuous, with no family left and few friends who had kept in touch over the years. But she did not seem to mourn what she had left behind. Her life was full of the present, her husband, her children, the ranch, the small community that had embraced her. As the 1890s approached, the West was changing. The railroad had brought more people and more development. St. Elmo, once a remote mining town, was now more accessible and bustling. The wild frontier was becoming less wild, more settled. Harrison sometimes felt a twinge of nostalgia for the earlier days, but Rose pointed out that change was not always bad. Their children would grow up in a world with more opportunities, more safety, more possibilities. Henry, approaching his teenage years, showed signs of becoming as good with horses as his father. Harrison began teaching him the finer points of training, pleased to have an eager apprentice. Helen, sharp as a tack at 9 years old, announced that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, a profession that Rose assured her was possible for women, even if it was unusual. Harold, still young at 3, was simply happy chasing chickens and following his older siblings around. In the summer of 1891, the Bennett family faced their greatest challenge when a wildfire swept through the region during a particularly dry spell. Harrison and every able-bodied man in the area fought the flames for 3 terrifying days, while Rose and the other women kept the firefighters supplied with food and water. The ranch was spared by a combination of hard work and favorable winds, but several neighbors lost everything. In the aftermath, the Bennett family opened their home to those who had been displaced, housing 3 families in their barn and outbuildings until they could rebuild. Rose organized the community response, collecting donations and coordinating work crews. Harrison led the effort to rebuild his neighbors' homes, refusing to accept any payment for his labor. It was, he said, simply what neighbors did for each other. The experience drew the community closer together and reinforced to Henry, Helen, and Harold the values their parents had tried to instill: generosity, hard work, and taking care of those in need. The children pitched in without complaint, sharing their rooms and their toys, helping to feed and care for the displaced families. By the time everyone was resettled and life returned to normal, it was autumn. On a crisp October evening, as the family gathered for supper around their table, Harrison looked at each face. Rose, still beautiful though now in her 30s with fine lines around her eyes from smiling. Henry, shooting up tall and looking more like a young man than a boy. Helen, animated as she told a story about something that happened at school. Harold, face smeared with mashed potatoes, giggling at his sister. "I am a lucky man," Harrison said suddenly, interrupting Helen's story. Everyone looked at him in surprise. Rose smiled softly. "We are all lucky," she corrected gently. "We have each other and we have this life we have built together." "Your mother is right," Harrison agreed. "But I am especially lucky because 13 years ago, I happened to be riding on a dusty road at exactly the right moment. If I had left Buena Vista an hour earlier or later, if I had taken a different route, if any of 100 things had been different, I would have missed the most important moment of my life." Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "And I am lucky that I was stubborn enough to walk off from that broken stage, even if it was foolish. My stubbornness brought me to you." Henry looked between his parents, clearly confused by the emotion in the room. "What are you talking about?" Rose laughed and wiped her eyes. "Your father is talking about the day we met. I was traveling to St. Elmo to be a teacher, and the stagecoach broke down. I decided to walk in the terrible heat, and I fainted on the road. Your father found me, gave me shade and water, and brought me to the ranch to recover." "And then you got married?" Helen asked, fascinated. "And then we fell in love," Rose corrected, reaching across the table to take Harrison's hand. "And yes, then we got married. And then we had you 3 wonderful children and this wonderful life. Tell us the whole story," Helen begged. "Please?" So they did, both of them contributing details, laughing at the parts that seemed funny in retrospect and marveling at how much had changed. The children listened raptly, even Harold, who was too young to fully understand but sensed the importance of the story. When the tale was finished, Henry said thoughtfully, "So if Mother had not been stubborn and walked in the heat, and if Father had not been in exactly the right place at the right time, we would not exist." "That is one way to think about it," Harrison agreed. "Though I prefer to think that we were always meant to find each other, one way or another." "I like that better too," Rose said softly, squeezing his hand. The years rolled on as years do. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Harrison and Rose grew older together, their love maturing into something even deeper and richer than it had been in those early days. They faced challenges, celebrated triumphs, and built a legacy that extended far beyond the boundaries of their property. Henry did indeed follow in his father's footsteps, taking over more and more of the horse training as Harrison's knees grew creaky and his back sometimes ached. Helen surprised everyone by actually pursuing her dream of veterinary medicine, traveling east to study at a women's college before returning to Colorado to set up a practice. Harold, the baby of the family, turned out to have a talent for business and took over managing the financial side of the ranch operations. As the new century approached, Harrison and Rose found themselves in the unexpected position of being the older generation. They became grandparents when Henry married a sweet young woman named Sarah and had a son of his own. Then came more grandchildren as their children built families of their own. Through it all, the core of everything remained Harrison and Rose's love for each other. They still took walks together in the evenings when weather permitted, still sat on the porch watching sunsets, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their hair turned gray, their steps slowed, but the bond between them never weakened. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, Miguel and his family, friends from town, all came together to honor the couple who had built so much from a chance encounter on a dusty road. Reverend Hoskins, now quite elderly himself, stood to offer a toast. "25 years ago, I married Harrison and Rose, and I remember thinking that I had never seen 2 people more meant for each other. Time has proven me right. They have built not just a successful ranch, but a beautiful family and a legacy of love and integrity. May we all be so blessed." Everyone raised their glasses, and Harrison stood, pulling Rose to her feet beside him. "I want to say something," he announced, and the room quieted. 25 years ago, I gave Rose my name when I married her. But the truth is, she gave me so much more. She gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and a love I did not know was possible. Rose Bennett, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I love you more today than I did on our wedding day." Rose was crying openly now, not bothering to hide her tears. "And I love you, Harrison Bennett. You saved my life that day on the road, and you have been saving it every day since by filling it with so much joy and love. I could not have dreamed of a better partner, a better father for my children, or a better life than the one we have built together." They kissed as their family cheered and applauded, and in that moment, it did not matter that they were older now, that their joints ached and their children were grown. What mattered was that they had found each other, held onto each other, and built something beautiful together. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories being shared. Grandchildren ran around playing, their parents trying half-heartedly to corral them. Miguel pulled out his guitar and played the old songs, the ones he had played at Harrison and Rose's wedding all those years ago. As the party wound down and people began to leave or settle in for the night in the various rooms and outbuildings, Harrison and Rose slipped away to their bedroom. They stood at the window, looking out at their land bathed in moonlight, the mountains rising dark against the star-filled sky. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Rose asked softly. "When I woke up after fainting," Harrison thought back, trying to recall. "I said a lot of things." "Which part? You said I will not let you fall when you put me on your horse." Rose turned to look at him, her face tender in the dim light. "And you never have, Harrison. In 25 years, you have never let me fall." Harrison wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I never will," he promised. "Not as long as I am breathing." They stood like that for a long time, two people who had become one through years of love and partnership, grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together and the choices they had made to build a life together. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Harrison eventually turned over the daily management of the ranch to Henry, though he still went out every day to check on the horses and offer advice when asked. Rose, her hair now completely silver, spent her time with her grandchildren, teaching them to read just as she had taught their parents, filling their heads with stories and knowledge. They took joy in simple things: morning coffee together on the porch, afternoon naps in the sun, evening prayers of gratitude. They attended church every Sunday, drove into St. Elmo for socials and town meetings, welcomed visitors to their home. Their love was a constant, steady presence that everyone around them could feel. In the spring of 1904, Harrison fell ill with pneumonia. Rose nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything else in her life, refusing to consider the possibility that she might lose him. Harrison, weakened but stubborn, fought his way back to health, motivated by the thought of leaving Rose alone. When he finally recovered, thinner and frailer than before, he took Rose's hand. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he said seriously. "We have more years together, I can feel it." Rose squeezed his hand, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Good," she said firmly. "Because I am not ready to let you go." And they did have more years, precious years that they treasured all the more for knowing they could not last forever. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, their 35th, their 40th. They saw their grandchildren grow up and start having children of their own, making them great-grandparents. The ranch continued to thrive under Henry's management, and the Bennett name became synonymous with integrity and quality throughout Colorado. But time, relentless and unstoppable, took its toll. Harrison's body, worn down by decades of hard work, grew increasingly frail. Rose, too, slowed down, though her mind remained sharp as ever. They both knew that their time was growing short, but they faced it together, as they had faced everything else. On a warm summer evening in 1910, as they sat on the porch watching yet another sunset, Harrison turned to Rose. They were both in their 70s now, their faces deeply lined, their bodies weary. But their hands were still clasped together, fingers intertwined as they had been for so many years. "I have been thinking about that day I found you on the road," Harrison said softly. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you? What did you think? I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dust and unconscious." He smiled at the memory. "And then when you woke up and looked at me with those green eyes, I thought my heart would stop. I did not know it yet, but I was already falling in love. Rose leaned her head on his shoulder. I thought you were an angel, she admitted. When I first opened my eyes and saw you blocking the sun, giving me shade, I thought I had died and gone to heaven, and you were there to welcome me. We built our own heaven right here, Harrison said, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them, the mountains in the distance, the home they had made together. We did, Rose agreed. We really did. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. The same colors that had filled the sky on their wedding day, on countless evenings throughout their marriage, on the day they met when Harrison had given Rose shade and water, and eventually his name and his heart. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, they made their way inside, moving slowly but together, still holding hands. They had built a life from a single moment on a dusty road, and that life had been filled with more love, more joy, and more meaning than either of them could have imagined possible. Harrison Bennett had found Rose Kimball on that blazing August day in 1878, and in saving her life, he had found his own. She had come west looking for a new beginning, and she had found everything she had never known to hope for. Together, they had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. And as they prepared for bed that night, as they had every night for more than 40 years, they thanked God for the heat, for the dusty road, for the broken stagecoach, and for every choice and chance that had brought them together. Because in the end, their story was not about a dramatic rescue or a hasty proposal, or even the successful ranch they had built. It was about two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love every single day, and who had built a life together that was worth every moment, every challenge, every sacrifice. Their love story, born on a dusty Colorado road in the height of summer, had lasted through decades of change and challenge. It had weathered difficulties and celebrated triumphs. It had created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Harrison had given Rose shade and water and his last name, but she had given him her heart, her partnership, and a love that transformed his entire existence. As they lay down to sleep that night, Harrison's arm around Rose, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, both of them felt the profound gratitude that comes from a life well lived and a love well kept. They had been blessed beyond measure, not because their life had been easy, but because they had faced it together. The Bennett Ranch continued to thrive for many more years, passing down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting the foundation that Harrison and Rose had built. The tale of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, and that true love, when found and nurtured, can create something that lasts beyond a single lifetime. Harrison and Rose lived out their remaining years in peace and contentment, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that they had built something meaningful. When Harrison finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Rose was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it through so many years. She mourned him deeply, but without regret, knowing that they had made the most of every day they had been given together. Rose lived another 2 years, spending her time with her family, tending her garden, and often sitting on the porch where she and Harrison had spent so many evenings. She spoke often of him, but without sadness, remembering instead all the joy and love they had shared. When she passed away quietly one spring morning, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were of Harrison, saying that she was ready to see him again. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the mountains they had both loved. Their graves became a place where family members came to feel connected to their past, to remember the love story that had started it all. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple but perfect. Harrison and Rose Bennett. Together they built a life of love. And so the story that began with a woman fainting from heat on a dusty road, saved by a cowboy who gave her shade and water and ultimately his name, became a legacy of love that endured through generations. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound moments in life come from the simplest acts of kindness, that true love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that when two people commit to building a life together, they can create something beautiful that lasts far beyond their own years. The Bennett family continued to tell the story, to honor the memory of Harrison and Rose, and to strive to live up to the example they had set. And every summer, when the heat beat down on the dusty Colorado roads, and the mountains rose stark and beautiful against the endless sky, someone in the family would remember that it was weather just like this that had brought their family into being, that had sparked a love story for the ages, and that had given them all the precious gift of the life that Harrison and Rose had built together.